Hi, hello, what's up? If you're new here, my name is Tina. Welcome to this little corner of internet. And for those who are not new here, thank you for being back. This is one of the biggest video where I'm gonna talk about the best and worst books I've read this year. The best being La Crème de la Crème and the worst being the ones I was disappointed in or that I'm hating. Like I wasted my time on them. So yeah, we're gonna talk about that today. And also I know that I'm bombarding you with a lot of videos these days, but that's the end of the year. There's so much to do and it's not gonna last long because in 1 week I'm gonna have a full-time job again for some exciting plans. I think I'm gonna tell you in the 1 year booktube anniversary video, so yeah, not talking too much about that. For this video I'm gonna try to summarize in few sentences the books and share with you my thoughts and feelings about them, and I'll see if it is too long. I'll just gonna make it in 2 parts, the worst and the best. So there are no particular orders for these books except for this one. This is the top one. This is one of my favorite book ever. It changed my perception of life and for the better. It is Breading Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and this is just so good. This is a non-fiction memoir about Kimmerer, who is a Native American from the Potawatomi Nation, and she wanted to become a biologist. She was always passionate by plants and she wanted to understand better her surroundings, but she was taught the scientific way of treating her surroundings as subjects and not as living being. And through short stories, she's trying to reconnect us with the generosity of the earth and how we can give back and how our relation can be much more healthier. And this is done in such a beautiful way because her prose is magnificent. She is talking about so interesting themes such as languages and the visions of scientists for the world. This is such a must read for everyone, according to me. Whether you're interested in nonfiction and ecological issues, whether you love memoirs, whether you're a human being, just a little bit conscious about the fact that we all live in one planet and that your actions are impacting others. Also, she's advocating the fact that we have to learn from plants and animals because some of them were here for billions of years before us and we have so much to learn. So much. It changed so much my perceptions on things, and I wish for you to read it. I wish for you to be enlightened by her. I'll just read for you 2 quotes. That's exceptional. I don't have 2 quotes for every book. First one being, because she's a professor, also she gives classes and conferences. When we talked about this after class, I realized that they could not even imagine what beneficial relations between their species and others might look like. How can we move toward ecological and cultural sustainability if we cannot even imagine what the path feels like? Yes, girl, I know. The questions scientists raised were not who are you, but what is it? This is so good. Please, if you have to read one book, if you have to remember one of the books I'm talking about in this video, this is this one. Next we have none other than A Prayer for the Crown Shine by Becky Chamber. And this is such a heartwarming science fiction story about a fictional world where robots gained self-awareness, but they also gained their independence from humans that were kind of exploiting them. Not kind, completely exploiting them. Except for several years after, when a robot, Bosscap, is encountering a T-monk named Dex, who is lost in her life. She's trying to figure it out, and he wants to be answered one and only question, which is, what does humans need? And this is the sequel of A Psalm for the Wild Build, and they are touring and asking people the question, what do you need? If you feel like you have to be comforted, like you have to be validated, that you're lost, this is such a must read, especially in your 20s, I think, and even maybe later when you're asking yourself questions and what you're doing here. So I have one quote for you to convince you, even though this is such a short book. Chef's kiss. But I'm convincing you with the quote. You don't have to have a reason to be tired. You don't have to earn rest or comfort. You're allowed to just be. Love it. Next we have, of course, Volume 1 of A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin, the Game of Thrones series, and this is a high fantasy fictional world where winter is threatening to return, bringing evil forces that have been lost for several years. And oh my, it was a long time since I felt such intense emotions, dread, horror, sadness, sorrow, and the characters are so well written. Plus this is multiple point of views written way. This makes everything even more interesting. The setting, the descriptions, the political issues and stakes, everything is so good. But also you have to bear in mind that this is so violent, this is dark, and this is you confronting the worst humans' behaviors and feelings, and this is harsh sometimes, but also this is so well written in a very vivid, real way. Loved it. I love Tyrion in this series, even though it is kind of a hate-love relation. But I have a quote from him: "Never forget what you are, for surely the world will not. Make it your strength, then it can never be a weakness. Armor yourself in it, and it will never be used to hurt you." And of course we also have Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. I've read only the first two of the Farseer trilogy and I've preferred the second one, but I've kind of putting them together, you know. I don't want to say too much about it, but this is set in a high fantasy medieval world where a boy is dragged to the castle because he's the bastard of one of the prince, and he soon learns to be useful to the castle and especially to the king in some ways. And I don't want to say too much, but I loved even more the second one because not that much action takes place in this one, but the political stakes and the way Robin Hobb writes about the context and the world building and the characters and their developments makes you root even more for them. And I felt so vivid emotions about things that were happening to them. If it is coming out of age, the main character, and you follow him and you grow with him, and this is making him so endearing. Really loved it. I love the character of the Fool in this series, and I have one quote for him. So Fitz is saying, "Not all men are destined for greatness." And the Fool is responding, "Are you sure, Fitz? Are you sure? What good is a life lived as if it made no difference at all to the great life of the world? A sadder thing I cannot imagine. What should a mother not say to herself, if I raise this child aright, if I love and care for her? She shall live a life that brings joy to those about her. And thus I have changed the world. Why should not the farmer that plants a seed say to his neighbor, the seed I plant today will feed someone, and that is how I change the world today." I love him so much. Next we have The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, which is a non-fiction memoir with short stories about John Green reviewing some facts, some events that happened during the Anthropocene era, which we are in, and this was just hilarious in some ways and also hopeful in others, because John Green is sharing in a very intimate way how he struggled with mental health issues, especially depression, and how he's finding little joys in paying attention to his surroundings, and he's rating everything with the 5 stars, which I love. It is so moving because it is about someone finding a way to just feel comfortable living his life, and that's moving me every time. That's a theme I love, and there is especially one quote I loved, and if you've seen the December wrap-up, you know, but I'll still read it to you. "I've spent so much of my life wondering why I am here, feeling this ache behind my solar plexus that my life isn't for anything, that it doesn't mean anything, that the hurt hurts too much and the joy gives too little. but in the shade of the ginkgo tree I am able to feel, if only in moments, why I am here. That I'm here to pay attention, I'm here to love and to be loved, and to know and to not know. And most of all, I am here to be not just on this planet, but with it. I'm here to be with you, to be with my family, and even to be with this forest. The gift is being itself, and who better to show us that than the oldest lady in town? I almost cried because it resonates deeply within me. That's all I need. Next, we have The Man Who Died Twice by Richard Osman, which is a thriller wrote in such a humorous tone. I loved it. The setting is so perfect. This is set in a retirement village with older people, especially first the murder club, loving to investigate on cases. This is the second volume in the series, and I loved this one even more because the writing was less confusing. I'm so attached to the characters. This is about Elizabeth receiving a letter from an old colleague. She has a long history with him and he's in deep trouble. He needs her help and diamonds might be involved. I loved it so much and I can't wait to read the third book this year. If you love thrillers and you love elderly people, this is for you. In order for you to have a sense of the writing, I have a quote. "More women are murdering people these days," says Joyce. If you ignore the context, it is a real sign of progress. Next, we have The Secret History by Lorna Tartt, and if you love dark academia thriller, this is for you. The writing is such a gem. From the first sentences, I was hooked to the story. This is one of the rarest books from which I love the first and the last sentences. This is about Richard, who is going to a new university in Vermont, and he wants badly to integrate these Greek classes with only 5 students and known to be taught by Julian, a very selective professor, but somehow he manages to integrate this class and he knows that the students are hiding something from him. We know from the beginning, from the first sentences, that something is happening, but the author manages to get us in such a tense way to be hooked by the story. This is genius. This is a masterpiece, and I'll read a quote for you in order to be hooked also. I want to read it. "I suppose at one time in my life I might have had any number of stories, but now there is no other. This is the only story we'll ever be able to tell." And this is such a good critique of the dark academia setting, which I love, which is to be in an daylight sphere, and the psychology of the character stayed with me for so long. After that, I was constantly asking myself, what would I have done if I were in their place? Mind-blowing. It is kind of slow-paced. It is not action-packed, but rather acts on the psychology of the character. So yeah, mind-blowing. Next we have Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, and this is a literary fiction book about a neurodivergent main character, Keiko, and she's explaining to us how she's fitting perfectly in a convenience store, which is something her relatives doesn't understand because they want her to be more ambitious, they want her to have a boyfriend, all the things they want in a conventional way, you know. And you follow her through those short pages and you get attached to her, and this is so interesting to get in the head of someone that doesn't fit in a dark humorous tone. I loved it. And I have a quote for you again. "The normal world has no room for exceptions and always quietly eliminates foreign objects. Anyone who is lacking is disposed of. So that's why I need to be cured. Unless I'm cured, normal people will expurgate me. Finally understood why my family had tried so hard to fix me." There is one character, particularly in these pages, I was hating so much, but overall, one of my favorite books. Next we have Slewfoot, A Tale of Bewitchery by Brom. Such a crush. There were no doubts about the fact that this was going to be a favorite. This is the story of Abitha, an English woman who is engaged to Edward, but he's part of a Puritan community and she's not used to that, so she has to acclimate, she has to adapt. Don't want to say too much, but she's facing the fact that she's alone against men and people accusing her of bewitchery, of being a witch. This is kind of slow paced, not that much action happening until kind of the end. The setting, the ambience, the vibes. This is about vibes, and the vibes were here. And Abitha is such a strong female main character from which you learn. Yeah, I learned from her to never give up, and the end just got me, and the illustrations inside of it are just gorgeous. A favorite. Really recommending it. It's super floppy and it's perfect for the spooky season or not. You're free to read it when you want. Next we have The Dead of Winter by Sarah Clegg, who is an historian, and she is telling us through short stories the folklore of Christmas. This is the dark face of Christmas, you know, about demons like Krampus and other creatures and mysticism. I loved it. It's super short, it's written in a very humorous tone, and we learned so much in the sense that she's telling us a bit more about the folklore type aspect of the research. This is as if Emily Wilds met reality, you know, but in some different way, because this is not about fae but Christmas folklore, because there are also footnotes. So yeah, really similar but in a shorter way and more realistic way. Next we have Tales from the Cafe by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, which is the second book in the Tales from the Cafe series. This is a Japanese literary fiction about a small coffee in a back alley that can allow you to go back in time, but you have some rules to respect in order to do that, and I loved it even more than the first one, even though it is a bit repetitive in the sense that they are telling us every time the rules, but the stories were so moving and you meet the characters from the first book again and they're evolving, and this is just one of the stories almost made me cry. So yeah, loved this one. Love this series. I cannot wait to continue it. One of my favorite quotes was, it wasn't that he was dissatisfied with his ordinary life, or was just that from somewhere in his heart he heard, I want to find work that is worth spending a lifetime on. It resonated with me so much. Loved it. Next we have This Violent Delight by Mika Nemerever, and I was so shocked by this debut novel. This is a thriller literary fiction about Julian who meets Paul in university in the early 70s in Pittsburgh, and they are drawn to each other, but really quickly an asymmetrical relation between them begins. Paul, who is a talented artist but is insecure, so much insecure, whereas Julian is effortlessly charming, and this is just escalating and spiraling down, and the psychology of the characters, they were so well written. I loved the writing of this book. It hooked me all the way, even though there were not that much action happening. The writing helped so much. So I have a quote for you. He couldn't stand to look at the truth, even though all they had ever been, was a pair of sunflowers who each believed the other was the sun. It is so good. This is so good in the weirdest way. I'm still shocked. I'm still shocked by it. So these were like crème de la crème, and now these ones are the honorable mentions, the ones that could have been a favorite but not quite. And we have firstly The Fellowship of the Ring from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I don't think I have to summarize for you the speech, but not quite a favorite because it is sometimes quite hard to digest, quite hard to read, but love the world building. I love how the characters are written. I love everything about this book, except the fact that sometimes I struggled a bit with the writing. So let's see with the second book. This book has also one of my favorite quotes of all time, which is, all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. Gandalf. Love you. Love you, Gandalf. Next we have The Prairie of the Orange Tree, which is a high fantasy set in a fictional world with different point of views. Firstly, a girl who wants to be a dragon rider. We have an outsider of the court who is just taking care in the shadow of the queen. And I loved the universe, I love the political stakes, even though sometimes it was quite long and the end resolved super quickly. So the rhythm felt a bit odd, but overall, really loved the story, really loved the characters, except for one, I'm not telling which one. I loved it even more than the prequel because I read the prequel first. What a mistake. And next, this one, even though it was not that much a mistake, this way I was kind of familiar with the universe, so in this one I wasn't too much lost and I was like, oh okay, I know this one. I also have a quote. It is, "No woman should be made to feel that she was not enough." Here, here, loved it, but not a favorite. Next we have She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. Equally with He Who Drowned the World, I loved them both so much. This is a historical fiction fantasy book about Zhu, a child who is destined to nothingness because she is living in China, set in 1345. Girls means nothing at this time, and she happens to take the identity of her brother for some reasons. I don't want to say too much, and I loved the way the characters were written. I love the fact that the characters were intertwined and the multiple point of views. I loved how the main character is fierce, how she is fighting destiny all the time, how she's dreaming of greatness and what she's able to do to achieve that, and how gender is approached in this story. But again, the events are resolved quite not that easily, but kind of easily. It's not a favorite, but I really loved this duology, so honorable mention for sure. And I have a quote for you. "Learn to want something for yourself, Mag. Not what someone says you should want, not what you think you should want. Don't go through life thinking only of duty, when all we have are these brief spans between our non-existences. Why not make the most of the life you're living now? The price is worth it." Loved it. Next we have The Dead Poets Society by A.H. Kleinbaum, and this is only honorable mentions because I reconsidered the fact that this came out after the film, and it's still on my honorable mentions because I cried while reading it even though I knew what was happening because I saw the movie. But this is the moving story about Ted Anderson, who is in a private school for boys, and a new English teacher named Keating is teaching them to think by themselves and to free from the expectations of the school and their parents. And they're resurrecting a tradition of poets cycle in the school, and they're meeting to recite poetry, and this is just so short but so moving, and I really recommend you to see the movie. I love the themes. It is just resonating with me. Being taught that you're not worth nothing and that you can think by yourself works for me. I have one of my favorite quotes ever again. "We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race. And the human race is filled with passion, and medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for." Love it, love it, love it. Bunny by Mona Awad, obviously because this is a dark academia thriller, magical realism, horror book about Samantha, who is part of a highly selective program, and in her writing class there is a cohort of girls who calls themselves bunnies. She despises them, except for one girl that is an outsider of the school, and Everything changes when she receives an invitation to the Smut reunion. Everything spirals down from there. You have such a sense of getting out of a fever dream. This is nothing like I've ever read. This is disturbing as heck, but in a good way, in such a good way. The writing was in a dark, humorous tone. This might not be for everyone, but I have a quote to make you understand a little bit more what I'm meaning by that. It is, "Can I take your coat?" Cupcake offers. I turn to her. She's looking at me so hopefully, so willing to take a coat I'm not wearing. I almost want to give her my skin. Yeah. Next we have Ninth House by Lee Bardugo. A dark academia horror paranormal book about Alex Stern, who is an unlikely student at Yale's freshman class, and you'll learn why during this book. I really recommend you not knowing too much, but reading the trigger warnings, because I haven't, and I read a part that made me cry because I was not ready. This is about her being in this university, and she's here for a purpose. She has some abilities, and she happens to investigate for something against the advice of the headmaster, but she does it anyway, and we follow her through the adventures. The ambience, the vibes of it all is just so good, but the story is kind of paced in an odd way. The rhythm is kind of off sometimes, but I loved the writing. It is just so good, but not a favorite. Next we have As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zulfa Katu. For a debut novel, this was so good. This is the story of Salama, a pharmacist student who happens to work at Homs Hospital during the war in Syria, and she's living with her sister-in-law, and she wants to help her escape the country because she's pregnant. This is a moving story. This is a historical young adult fiction about finding hope and finding beautiful things even in the most desperate situations, and even though the writing was a bit repetitive sometimes. I loved to read a little bit more about historical fiction set in Arabic countries. So yeah, the writing could improve, but the story was there. It was good. I have a quote for you still. With all the destruction happening down there, it's so easy to forget the beauty that's up here. The sky is so beautiful after rainfall. Moving, just moving. Next we have Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, and this is the moving story of a fictional science fiction dystopian book about Kathy, who is not 31, but she's retelling us her story as a student at a boarding school, and there they learned that they have a special purpose, that they have to accept it and not question it, their conditions, and they don't see the outside world that much, and they're not asking too much question about it. This is a book about friendships, about relations and human conditions, and how you can be ripped off of a life without even questioning it, and this is just so moving. I have a quote for you, which is, "What I'm not sure about is if our lives have been so different from the lives of the people we save. We'll all complete. Maybe more of us really understand what we've lived through or feel we've had enough time." Next we have Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I'm not much of a romance girl. You don't see a romance book in here, but this one is so cute. This is set in the Regency era, and this is about Dora, who has lost half her soul when she was little. You will learn how, and she's growing up and she has to make relation, but this is quite hard when you only have half a soul and that you are socially awkward. But her cousin is deeply attached to her. They are kind of best friends, and she meets someone, and this is so cute. It made me giggle so many times. This was super cute. Also, everything happens so fast, and that's always kind of the case, I think, in romance book, but that's why I kind of struggle with them. but still I really loved the love interest in this one. And as it is said so many times, this is kind of a crossover between Howl's Moving Castle and the Bridgerton Chronicles. So yeah, really loved it, but just not a favorite. Next we have Notes on an Execution by Danielko Kafka, which is a literary fiction thriller about Ansel, who is condemned. You don't really know why, and he deeply wants to escape. But his story is told through different point of views, especially from the woman in his life. I loved how the story unfolded, how everything was intertwined, and how this was so morally grey. I loved how she also criticized the twisted way of justice and the judicial system. I thought that the pacing was a bit off sometimes, but overall I really liked it. It's just not a favorite. I have quotes: "There is good and there is evil, and the contradiction lives in everyone. The good is simply the stuff worth remembering. The good is the point of it all." The writing was a bit repetitive sometimes, but overall I really liked it. Next we have Emily Wilde's Map of Otherlands by Ada Fawcett. This is a fantasy kind of cozy mystery about Emily Wilde, who is an academic and she's making research about fays, and I love this one even more than the first one because she is on a new adventure on the second one, and the characters, the love interest especially, we know them better, so everything is more credible, and I love the relationship. I love the humoristic tone, and it made me giggle, not as much as Half a Soul, but so many times. And I just think that the balance between the adventure and how it resolved, and wanting it to be a fantasy book but also with lighter stakes, is a bit off sometimes, but overall I really like it. I can't wait for the third one to come out. This is just so entertaining. That's why it's in honorable mentions. I have a quote for you is: "Dear Emily," he said, as I sat down, not troubling to lift his head from his hand, but smiling at me slantwise. "You look as if you've come from a wrestling match with one of your books. May I ask who won?" I love it. Next we have What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher and Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and I'm putting them equally on the same review because they're treating kind of the same subjects. This is about main characters going to kind of weird house to check on a relative and try to save the relative, but everything goes in a weird way, as you can maybe foresee it, and I preferred What Moves the Dead because despite the fact that this one is really entertaining, it is sometimes a bit repetitive on the writing. This one in shorter pages made me feel so different emotions, and I loved so much the humoristic tone of it, but overall really liked the two. I have some quote from What Moves the Dead. It is: "If we don't pretend we are laughing, we might have to admit just how broken we are. The dead don't walk, except sometimes when they do." And last but not least, for honorable mention, we have The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, the debut fantasy novel of this author. This is an epic fantasy military story set in a world inspired by China's bloody history from the 20th century, and we follow Rin, who took the Keiju to enter a military school, and you'll see if she manages or not, because she wants to escape her condition. She is an orphan of war, living in a family that doesn't quite love her that much, and I felt that this was a bit long sometimes. The rhythm was quite slow sometimes. I surprised myself thinking, okay, I'm maybe a little bit bored now, but overall, really love the stories. I can't wait to read the second one. I love the main character so much. She's fierce, she's audacious for sure. So can't wait to see what she's putting from her hat on the next books. Yeah. And I think unfortunately that I'll have to make another video for the worst books because the light is abandoning me. It's 4 p.m. but it's raining, so there's not much light. Thank you for being still here till the end. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, put a like. I really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for being nice. I hope to see you on the next video. Bye!